What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the stream. We're going to do some discussion today. It's another Monday live stream. We're going to talk some 40k. Tyranids had some awesome results over the weekend, so I'd like to talk about maybe a little bit of the state of the Tyranid faction, discuss whether or not they're as super broken as everyone talked about, and I also played a tournament this weekend, and I'll just talk about my games for that too. So we'll probably get started there. As you might notice, I don't have a green screen up today because if you've been following along, at least on my Twitch live streams, there's been an endless saga of moving into this new area, this new space. It's finally happened. It's still a little bit in production. You can kind of see there's some painter's tape still on the walls. Pay no attention to that. But as this gets furnished and gets filled out, this will be the area that we stream in the future. We'll have this whole area to set up for live streaming and doing in-person games and stuff like that. So lots of exciting stuff coming in the future for this space. I'm very excited. It's been kind of a nightmare this last two or 3 weeks or so of moving everything over and getting through all the bureaucracy. But thanks for hanging out, everybody. Hopefully we're back to a relatively normal schedule, and we'll be able to do some in-person live streams as well. How's it going, everybody in chat? Looks like there's a ton of people in here. Thanks everyone for joining. Hope everyone had a good weekend. Hope everyone's having a good Monday so far. And yeah, let's get into some discussion. So I played a tournament this weekend I'd like to go through. So as we've done before, I just I have my photos from the event here, and we'll just do a little bit of a discussion about it. For the event, I brought, of course, the ignominious Harry Dan. If you want, I put the list in the bot. It should be the same. So ! list in the chat if you want to check it out. But yeah, I was pretty hype on Harry Dan. I know a lot of people are very up on the Devourer, Termagants, and the Hive Guard and all those styles of lists. But I think there are still some problematic units that Tyranids don't have great answers to outside of playing, you know, a strength 10 gun with a 48-inch range. it's 4 damage and everything. So yeah, this was just a 3-round RTT I played in. As you can see, the terrain was pretty wonky. It was very, at least on this table, and I have some photos of some of the other tables. The terrain was very cool. It was also very voluminous. I think the layout was fine. Essentially, we had ruins in the center here, as well as these ruins in the corners. It was, you know, it's all just kind of standard 40k layout stuff. These were forests, as per basically the US Open layout. But these walls are like 3 inches thick, which created some interesting gameplay interactions. A little bit of a fun fact, if you play at the Nova Open, they actually have like 2 to 3 inch thick ruin walls. At least they did in the past, in the last one that they were allowed to run. I don't know if they'll continue to use that style of terrain, but the walls that big aren't actually totally out of the question, but it was kind of interesting to play around. So my first round, I played against Thousand Suns. Oop, my slideshow's not working here, everybody. I apologize. There it goes. So we can see the layout here. This was on priority targets. So we had the 5 objectives. 1, 2, 1 in the middle beneath this big, I don't know, portal, I guess it's supposed to be. 3, 4, and then this one is hidden by Harry Dan. My opponent was playing a pretty interesting list, and I have some pictures of his models. He's running Carcadons, or Space Sharks, as they were historically known, and he had them converted up to be Thousand Suns. I think he had a pre-existing Carcadons army and then sort of converted it over. But he had some very cool stuff. He had a big, huge land shark to be his Mutalith Vortex Beast, which I really appreciated. And I don't know if I got any pictures of his other conversions, but he had Blood Crushers of Khorne converted to have shark heads, and those were his Chaos Spawn, which I appreciated also. And then obviously he had his sorcerers and things converted up. So it was a very fun looking army. A little bit of an interesting Thousand Suns build. There were no Scarabacel Terminators. It was all Rubric Marines. He had a couple of units of Full Flamer Marines, as well as the Vortex Beast, 2 Volkite Contemptors, 5 Chaos Spawn in 1 unit to dump all the buffs on, and then he has the stratagem to add attacks and then pick the mutation that they get, which is pretty good. And then he also had, you can kind of see it over here, he had Forge Fiend, is a little shark head. I love this guy. I think by his own admission, Forge Fiend's probably not the best pick, but I think he had the model, wanted to play with it, and it was in place of another Volkite Contemptor, so that was really it's basically a straight swap. yeah, it was pretty good models, pretty cool models, chat. I ended up winning the roll to go first in this one, which is pretty good. My opponent had his Volkite Contemptors placed around the corner here. The Harridan was able to get up so he could draw line of sight to them and blew both of them up on the top of one. Although, interestingly, because the size, like literally the physical size of the ruins, we actually, we essentially could not place in range where one ruin could shoot at the other one. So the Hive Guard basically did nothing for most of the game. My opponent also couldn't really profitably perplex them either, because he would have to move so far forward in order to get within the 30-inch range of the spell that he would just end up getting killed by Gene Stealers or whatever. So it was the ruins were pretty interesting. They created some interesting gameplay interactions. I also I had Swarm Lord, Hive Commander, a unit of Rippers. You can kind of see them below Harridan's wing over here. And they were there to eat any direct line of sight smites. So essentially we placed Harridan so that he wasn't in range of the wall. So you couldn't get smote through the wall without extending the range of the spell. And then, so anything that came to attack him would have to get a line of sight to the Rippers as well. So the smites would go into the Rippers, potentially get saved by the Leviathan sub-faction trait, and protect the Harridan from the worst of the smiting. But obviously being able to kill two Volkite Contemptors immediately removes a lot of the threat to the Harridan. He took a little bit of damage from smiting and random shots and stuff. My opponent, let's see if what I got pictures of. So this is the battle round later, but my opponent ended up Sorcerer's Facading a big unit of Flamer guys in here with the +1 strength, and then using the stratagem for +1 to wound. So they were wounding on 4s. We had some ridiculous dice happen. He rolled, I think he had 9 flamers in the unit, so he rolled, I think, 42 or 44 attacks or something like that. Like a huge, way over average on the number of attacks from that unit. And rolled a billion wounds, like 28, 29 wounds. And then I saved all but 6 of them. I did have Catalyst on the Harridan, so he had the 5+ Embalm into the 5+ Catalyst, but I saved way too many. So the dice spiked both ways. It was pretty silly. Should have told my opponent to play a Shark Tyranid army? Absolutely. What unit in Tyranids is the land sharkiest of the units? Is it I guess like maybe a Carnifex? Who's a long melee boy? It's like Trigons are snakes, right? Like a Toxicrene, I guess. I don't know. Haruspexes are definitely like alligators with that big mouth. Maybe a hippo. I don't know. What's the shark equivalent? I guess Trigons are land sharks in that they actually swim through the land, right? 1,000 of the suns, chat. Can you imagine? That's so many suns. Magnus was a busy boy. He had 1,000 suns. So then my follow-up turn, I was able to get the Genestealer unit in here out of line of sight of the Flamer unit that was in here. You can see the remainder of the Flamer boys back here. Was able to kill those guys off, but had a little bit of a mishap. My opponent had moved up some models. He had a Scarab called Squad up on the top side here, move up. He had one come in from the ruin and sort of hide behind these pillars here. And then he had the Chaos Spawn unit come in over here, and he dumped all the buffs on the Chaos Spawn. So Weaver, and Glamour, both on the Chaos Spawn. I assumed that, or the plan was to shoot down most of, it was just a 5-man Rubric squad that was next to these pillars. I was going to shoot down most of them. I think I killed 2 in the Psychic phase, which is important because I was able to block Wrath of Magnus for a turn or 2, which is a pretty big deal. So we had an epic battle of Psychic powers. And then I could use the Harridan to kill the rest of them over and off the table, so I wasn't in danger of all the smites and things. So I had killed 2 in the Psychic phase, so there were 3 models left. I allocated 2 Hive Guard to shoot at them, and I think I also flurried the Hive Guard because I was also going to try to kill a couple of Rubric squads of the smaller Rubric squads that were dotted around. And I ended up rolling, I think, on my 4 shots against the 3 models, I rolled 2 6s. It turned into 6 shots. They all hit. They all wounded. My opponent made or failed all but 3 saves. So I just had to biff damage on one of them, and they all rolled enough damage to kill the unit. So they actually wiped the unit the Harridan was going to charge. The Harridan turned around and charged the Chaos. Or I double tapped to the Chaos Spawn to kill as many of them as I could. The Harridan charged into the Chaos Spawn instead because there was 1 left after the Hide Guard were done with them. They were -1 to hit and had a 4+ invulnerable save from Weaver. And I think he got 3 wounds through. Hitting on 3s because of the bioweapon bond, and then wounding on 2s, and I think I rerolled a hit roll in there somewhere as well. He got 3 wounds through all of that, and my opponent made all of his invulnerable saves. So the Harridan actually didn't end up overrunning. He stood on the ground and he took the attacks back from the Chaos Spawn, and unfortunately for him, that he got to have this epic battle with a land shark, which is pretty cool. He did end up actually going down to the psychic phase out of the Thousand Suns. So a bit of a mishap there. Definitely should have shot 1 Hive Guard unit into the Rubik Marines instead of 2. Definitely my fault. Going into a 4+ invulnerable save was awkward for the Harridan, but I definitely did not expect 2 Hive Guard to just full straight up kill 3 Rubik Marines. I was rolling too well for my own good, essentially. And then we moved on to clean up. Losing the Harridan wasn't the end of the world, though, because he had already killed a bunch of stuff. We'd killed we'd killed the Chaos Spawn. The Hive Tyrant ended up coming around and finishing him off with the Devourers. We were able to smite a lot of the Rubik Marines to death, and the Hive Guard had just basically swept this area of the board clean every turn. So even with the Harridan going down, we were already well up enough on attrition that I was able to take that one down, and that was a pretty big win. I don't remember the scores. I guess I could look them up. But some of the interesting things that this list did, I talked about a kind of a progressive battle-ready point score in a recent video, and this event actually adopted that. So your battle-ready points for each game were determined on essentially the ITC hobby track score. So I had actually lost some battle ready points because I don't have a display board. So it was actually down 2 points. It didn't end up mattering in any of these games, but it could have. But it was a little funky. It was a 96-73 win. Obviously, it's out of 105 points instead of 100 points, so it's a little bit inflated, but you can kind of get an idea. It was a very close game. Being priority targets, we both had some pretty good opportunities to score good points. So it was always the scores were always going to be high both ways. And it ended up being a really good one. So I think going first definitely helped because you were able to kill the Volkite Contemptors early. But interestingly, the interesting, I think, dynamic of us, particularly this table, was that the train was so big and so heavy that my opponent's shooting couldn't really do anything unless it was shooting at the Harridan. So I'm almost never in danger of losing anything besides the Harridan. So like strategic reserving the Harridan means that my opponent's shooting is also basically all nullified for a turn or two. Which is not, you can't say that all the time. A lot of times it's something for them to do, but in this case, it's going to be tough for anybody to deal any damage to each other. Shit. It's a feeling when you're trying to show tactical prowess and all the chat's talking about is the conversions of your opponent. I mean, the conversions are the highlight of that game, chat. Like, don't get me wrong. My opponent playing with a bunch of literal land sharks is very cool. Yeah, Harridan, he's definitely a sky shark, chat. I don't know if he's a land shark. He's an airborne shark, for sure. Is there a shark that shoots a gun? Which shark has a firearms license? That's the important one. So that put us on to round 2. I was actually playing against Imperial Knights this time. My opponent was just running 4 big knights and 1 armiger. He had a little armiger war dog. It might have been a Moirax, actually. Yeah, I think it was a Moirax with the Siege Claw. This one was pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, this is a very bad matchup for Knights. The Harridan is just the silver bullet, I think, and especially for the Magera chassis, since it's unless it can get in range with its Rad Cleanser, Its guns have a tough time against the Harridan. Strength 7 versus T8 is like tough to get wounds through on the lightning cannon, even if you roll a bunch of 6s to hit and get those Tesla shots off. So he was running 3 Megaeras plus a Crusader. Is that right? The double sword guy. The double melee weapon basic knight champ. I think it's a Crusader, but I don't want to be wrong. Unfortunately for him as well, I also won the roll to go first. So I ended up putting smites and shooting into the knight at the bottom here. And then the Harridan ripped this knight off the table. Basically because my opponent, he pulled an ion shield early on this guy. So the Harridan didn't have to shoot into rotate ion shield. So he just turned around and shot this guy who didn't have any defensive buffs active on him. This one had a 4+ invulnerable save. And one thing that I do want to mention is that my opponent actually made little tags. You can see them. He made little tags for all of his knights that told you what their warlord traits or relics were, which I was very appreciative of, because that's the awkward thing about knights is that oftentimes they all have slightly different capabilities, and keeping in mind which one does which thing is a little bit tough. And my opponent was very nice that he made little banners for them that told his opponent what they did, which was awesome. It was a gallant chat. Thank you. I appreciate it. Is the Crusader the double gun one? Is that what I'm thinking of? I guess I could look this up. I probably should. This is embarrassing. I could also just look at my opponent's list, but you know what? That's too easy. Yeah, Crusader's the double gun one. And then Errant is one of each. Yeah, okay. We got there. Thanks, chat. I appreciate you guys. Yeah, I think I've basically only ever seen Crusaders, or there's often one gallant, but I mean, in 8th edition, it was like Megaeras were not even considered. It was always like 2 or 3 Crusaders, and then one with either one or 2 melee weapons, essentially, or a Lancer. You saw a Lancer pretty often for the extra move, but now it's all Megaeras all the time. And unfortunately, in this game, it was all Megaeras for a very short time, because I killed the first Megaera. I've killed basically 1.5 Megaeras. This one was dead. This one was dinged up at the bottom. And then round 2, I did an interesting thing where after I won the roll to go first, I had the Harridan placed here. I actually strategic reserved him into the back corner. You don't want to rotate so the Harridan goes off the table, because he strategic reserves if you do that. So you have to be careful where his tail goes if you want to rotate him. But with the strategic adaptation redeploy, you can like set him up so he's already on the correct trajectory. So we basically had him so his tail and wings were like perfectly in this little corner here, and that meant that he only had to move 20 inches forward to where he is, and was out of range of a couple of the at least the second rad cleanser. I was always going to get 1 rad cleanser into me, and it actually dealt like 12 damage, I think. He rolled like 11 shots in the rad cleanser, which was a lot. But the second rad cleanser didn't get into the Harridan, so he was able to tank that, and then go on to shoot another. I think he shot this Megaera to death. We killed this Megaera with the Hive Guard and smites and stuff, and then at the end of the game, we had to have a big Pacific Rim monster battle, so the Harridan just charged the Gallant, and we haven't had an epic duel. The Harridan came out on top, though, so 6 damage melee weapons, Good stuff. So that was a big win. We can look up the score, but I think I took Retrieve Octaria's data, so I didn't quite max that one. That was the first time I'd ever taken Titan Hunter. So we got a big 96 on that one, and that put me into the final game. Now this game was actually I took some other pictures of the event actually while we're here, chat. I took this one. This one kind of gave me this is an old-timey Warhammer feels. We've got the shoals of piranhas, I guess, supporting the devilfish. I thought that the look of this Tau army set up like it was very cinematic. I really appreciated it. We had lots of cool and interesting tables too. This one, like I said, a lot of the terrain was very voluminous. It was very heavy terrain, which obviously I think tends to make the games better. This one, I mean, these things are huge, obviously. These are probably 5 or 6 inches wide. I don't know what they were keyworded as, but it looked kind of difficult to play on. But I definitely appreciated the fact that they had enough terrain to make the games like, you know, there's a lot of line of sight blocking on the table, obviously. We saw some tactical tortoise objective markers into the in the wild there. Exclamation point objectives in chat if you want to get yourself some of those. Pretty good. Shameless plug. Here's another good one. This was a Space Hulls versus Sororitas game on this cool city table. We had a big sort of orbital defense gun there. Basically, I just want to gush over the terrain at this event because it was all very cool and very functional. We had some wolf bots action going on. Space Hulls Dreadnought spam. This RTT was it's sort of an annual thing that a local store runs, and it was actually very well attended. There was 30 people, I think, at the start of the event. I think they had some drops. Ended up being 28, but a relatively large size for an RTT. How does all the MDF not burn up in the lava? It's a great question. Poly principle. I'm thinking that a single Octarius box would be enough terrain. Yeah, so I mean, one thing you can see here is they're actually using the 3d6 Wargaming terrain templates. So the bases of a lot of the tables, not all of them, but the bases of the terrain were these boxes. And the physical terrain you put on those is less important. It's still important because what you touch it, you use for line of sight. But as long as you have like large bases like that, you can make a small amount of terrain go a long way, which is good. But yeah, I mean, more terrain, more better, generally speaking. Not 100% the case, especially if you're running like non-flying super heavies. It gets a little bit awkward, but any vehicles essentially. But terrain tends to make the game a little bit more interesting. So yeah, anyway, we were moving on to the finals. I was up against Death Guard, and this game was super sick. This is a ridiculously close game. Some wonky stuff happened that I think is important to talk about. But we were on sweep and clear. Let's see if here we go. Here's the table. So we got 5 objectives, 1 in the center, and then there's one over here that you can't quite see because we had to remove the template, and then in all of the 4 corners as well. The objectives locked in, so as soon as you held them at the start of your turn, you held them forever until your opponent takes it away from you. And then the mission-specific secondary was just holding the middle for 3 points at the end of your turn, or you can get more if you hold your opponent's objective as well. But this might be sort of I don't know. This might be kind of a worst case scenario for a lot of Tyranids lists. Death Guard tend to be very resilient to the kind of damage Tyranids deal. Obviously, the Harridan's a little bit different. Tyranids have a lot of 2 damage and D3 damage and stuff like that. And the universal damage reduction is an absolute killer. Having a 3 damage gun that can go up to 4 damage is pretty good. So that does. This is one of the matchups where having the Harridan helps a ton. But also having very reasonable indirect fire in the Plague Burst Crawlers, as well as direct fire. There's 6 entropy cannons plus the 2 Volkite Contemptors in this list. Means that you can't even close effectively into the list because it will just shoot you to death. This particular one was also being protected by 10 Death Shroud Terminators, so the melee is super powerful. And in addition, direct assault tends to be very good for Death Guard because all they really need to do is fight for the center objective. Obviously, the side objectives are going to be bad for them because they don't really have the maneuverability to get there. But as long as they can hold down this objective, which they should be able to do by just putting a bunch of Plague Burst Crawlers on it, and then if they can lock this down for long enough, and they certainly have enough models and enough firepower to take it every turn if your opponent takes it, then they'll get their 10 points every turn, they'll get their direct assault every turn. They don't necessarily stranglehold super well, so they can't sort of do the whole wombo combo of stranglehold plus direct assault. But the fact that they direct assault so reliably is... it's pretty tough to get around Death Guard on this in this mission. Roger, Rad Cleansers don't wound Titanic on 2s? Is that the case? If so, we played it wrong. But we played it wrong to my detriment, which I don't feel bad about. I would be surprised if that's the case. Yeah, you're right, actually. You wound on 2s unless the target is vehicle or Titanic. So there you go. Didn't even need to be worried about the Rad Cleansers, actually. Well, good shout out, chat. Definitely missed that. I think, yeah, that's an interesting one. So the other, I mean, the weirdness is that like radium carbines, a lot of the rad style weapons out of Adeptus Mechanicus don't have a Titanic claws. So I just assumed that was the case for all the rad stuff, but I guess it's not. Nice, very cool. How dare I take an extra 12 damage? It was yeah, not. I think either way, even with the Rad Cleanser wounding on 2s, a very bad matchup for my opponent. So I don't. I think he needed all the help he could get. Unfortunately, the Harridan killing a Megara through rotate ion shields every turn is like super tough to get through, especially since they don't shoot him back super well. Well, I appreciate it, Roger. You're the best. Clayton Thompson, is there a cap on the number of CP you can get with Neural Lobe? It's 1 per battle round. You can only farm 1 per battle round. It doesn't have the... There's no... it doesn't overcome the CP regeneration restrictions like Feeder Tendrils does. Federation United. Love the look of the Tau. Appreciate someone still repping the greater good even in their current state. I know. We're fingers crossed for a new Tau Codex soon, because they super duper need it. So anyway, in this matchup, to make matters worse, I also lost the roll to go first. And interestingly, the terrain on this table, this is the one table, and this is also sort of by admission by the event organizers themselves as well. But this is the one table where the terrain was not particularly awesome. It was fine, like it was functional. I think I'd be happy to see it at any RTT, but definitely like it wasn't, you know, the US Open standards are much better, I think, for terrain. We had a lot of crates around the edges. They kind of didn't really do that much. We had these ruins in the sort of in the midboard. 2 ruins over here. And the big difference was that the ruins on the deployment zone corners were significantly different. So this one obviously is just kind of a big US Open style ruin.
Hey Trevi, any changes to the list going forward? What did you make of the lists from the Austin Open? Keep up the awesome content.
Thanks for the super chat, Brandon. I appreciate it, dude. So the Harridan list, I don't know if I would make any changes. One thing I haven't played with that I'd like to play with is swapping out the... So 2 potential swaps. You could swap the Flying Hive Tyrant for a Maliceptor. I don't love that because I think the maneuverability of the Hive Tyrant and having another thing that can shoot infantry is super, super good. But I think that's a potential, and especially since it protects the Harridan if you go second a little bit better with the -1 Strength Aura. But the other one that I'd like to play with is swapping the Neurothrope for a Tyranid Prime. So that unlocks the Synaptic Link for 6's auto wound, especially for the Gene Stealers. So when the Gene Stealers go in, they can do a little bit more damage. But you can also like put it on Swarm Lord and stuff like that, and it's just fine. But the downside is that when you come to the late game, especially if the Harridan goes down or is, you know, occupied with something, you run a little bit low on damage output, and having the extra smite out of the Neurothrope, I think, is usually very helpful. I would almost always put like a foot character in the list to be the Chapter Master Caddy, but whether it's a Neurothrope or the Tyranid Prime, I think is, you know, it's probably up to personal preference. That's I haven't actually played with the Tyranid Prime yet, but definitely one that I would like to play. And if I had more Gene Stealers in the list, I would definitely play a Tyranid Prime for sure, 100%. Well, I think we'll probably talk about the Austin Open after we go over the this last game here. I mean, there's a lot of Tyranid innovation to talk about, a lot of Tyranid results, and I think it's going to be interesting. So yeah, talking about the terrain on this table, obviously we had a big open ruin here, so it was obscuring. So we had some line of sight blocking, basically like this. But the ruin itself was, you know, it was a Pegasus ruin, so it was totally perforated by windows. If you look on the other side, though, my opponent had a essentially a triangular base, right? So the line of sight blocking was much better because it had this huge wide frontage that he could stand behind. Plus, the building itself was opaque, which means he could put models into it and they also couldn't be seen. So the role for attacker defender was actually super duper relevant here because that ruin is super strong. Obviously, like, as you can see, my stuff is like pushed all the way to the back so that it doesn't it's not in line of sight, and I would have loved to have been able to put Hive Guard up in this building and put them in cover and still be out of line of sight so they don't take as much damage from the mortars, but unfortunately it was not to be because my opponent rolled the attacker defender roll and then also won the roll to go first, so it was all bad. I ended up I did some interesting stuff with the strategic adaptation redeploy. I had my Hive Guard back here in this big empty space, and I actually ended up strategic reserving them. I'm not 100% convinced this is the correct play, but I decided to make it and see how it went. You lose 3 to 4 Hive Guard to the Plague Burst Crawlers on average, assuming that they Disgusting Force one of them. And that's just like a brutal amount of damage to the unit that you're like really leaning on to kind of attrition down the Death Shroud Terminator units in the late game. So I decided just to fade that attack entirely and just hope for the best. Once they come on, you can onslaught them. Obviously, you can't do the command phase buffs on them, so they're significantly less powerful, but they can still come on and deal some reasonable damage if you get that onslaught off. I also had shifted, I had the Harridan kind of, I think, up in the front, basically, because he's kind of a dead drop. And I shifted him back such that with how the Contemptor Dreadnoughts in the back of my opponent's deployment zone had to move, one of them could move around the corner and shoot his Volkites at the Harridan, but the other one couldn't quite actually make it there. So I was able to fade one Volkite Contemptor shooting the Volkites. I still got hit by the missiles, but I didn't have to take 100% of the shooting, just most of it. The shooting for my opponent's stuff wasn't incredible. He ended up actually just dropping every attack into the Harridan. Wounding on 4s with the entropy cannons and the missile launchers and stuff like that is a little bit awkward, and he didn't roll super great, and I think he ended up doing 14 damage with the first turn of shooting, which I definitely could have been higher, and I was a little bit worried. I was happy I didn't take as much damage as I did, but I got off. It was still a lot. It's still a lot of damage, and obviously, another concerted round of attacking probably kills the Harridan, unfortunately. But fortunately, my opponent had also taken Grind Them Down, and focusing everything into the Harridan rather than wasting mortar shots attacking like Rippers or something like that meant that he didn't get to kill anything on turn 1, and so he wasn't going to be scoring Grind Them Down, and that obviously becomes very relevant. He also took Assassinate, so he was looking to kill the Hive Tyrants specifically, and he took Direct Assault, like we talked about. Now, I also took Assassinate. If I can get ahead on the attrition game, I get all the Harridan gets all the characters in the late game, essentially, is the game plan. Whether or not that's a defensible pick, I don't know. I'm not sure if there was anything better I could have taken, but that's what I ended up with, so that's where we went. I also took Engage in all fronts and Retrieve Octarius data, which is kind of standard. I don't like to take Direct Assault in this mission if my opponent has a very aggressive army, and that's because you essentially are just, you can score 3 points a turn, but you have to bleed your army to do so, and you often will run out of units that are able to get up and get that Direct Assault. So around 3 or 4, it starts being very difficult to score Direct Assault, and especially if your opponent has like these Death Shroud Terminators and Poxwalkers, Plague Burst Crawlers, these really heavy, hard to kill units that are on that objective. Unless you can contest them every turn, it's, you have to overcommit essentially to kill them, which is a little bit awkward. So especially as Tyranids being such a flimsy army, I almost never take Direct Assault unless I am like significantly more aggressive than my opponent's list. So after taking all the damage on the Harridan, my opponent had actually run up his Plague Drone over to here, his little Fleshmower guy, and to get that objective. Now I had some good rolls here, I will admit. I rolled an advance roll for this Hive Tyrant. The way he's situated, the interaction between the ruins here, which are windowless on this quarter, and the crate meant that there wasn't a line of sight from the Plague Burst Crawlers that could actually, that was not obscured by this building here to the Hive Tyrant, but the Hive Tyrant could draw line of sight to the Poxwalkers. So I needed something to start trying to deal with these Poxwalker units, because I needed to get rid of my opponent's easy objective secured as quickly as possible. So I felt like I needed to play very aggressively with the Hive Tyrant this early. Now, he needed a pretty good advance roll to get there, and I think he ended up he rolled a 1, and I thought long and hard about it. I ended up CP rerolling it into a 6 to actually get him where he needed to be. I also rolled a 6 on this Ripper Swarm that's over here on their advance roll, and I used a Metabolic Overdrive to get them from where they were all the way over to this objective, so they were in a position to lock that objective in. So some good advance rolls coming out early. I did make a little bit of a mistake, which I just totally didn't catch at all. But I moved the Ripper Swarm that was up at the top here, basically behind these crates, and I had them within 6 inches of the Swarm Lord to double move them onto the objective, so I was threatening a lock-in on that objective as well. What I didn't catch is that there's actually a little teeny bit of line of sight, you can basically see it, from where the Plague Burst Crawlers are, basically like that. That you can draw line of sight to behind this ruin from where the Swarm Lord was. And I ended up basically, with the way he was rotated, his tail like stuck out a little bit over that line of sight. So I actually put the Swarm Lord in line of sight, which was a total mistake. I think I could have spread the Rippers farther back and not have had that happen, or literally just like rotate the Swarm Lord so his tail was farther back, and I don't think my opponent could see him. So that was a pretty big deal. But I was feeling pretty good because I had these sort of pseudo unassailable positions in the corners here. My opponent did have Death Shroud Terminators in reserve, which is one of the reasons that this Neurothrope actually stayed on this objective, despite the fact I locked the objective in, was I wanted to be able to screen out any position where my opponent could take it and hold it. So there was a potential that he drops the Death Shrouds in and tries to shoot the Neurothrope to death, which that was a risk I was willing to take, I think, because then I get to pick up a unit of Death Shroud Terminators basically for free, or for the cost of a Neurothrope. Obviously, losing the rerolls and stuff would be very bad. You can use the stratagem to give perfectly adapted to the Hive Tyrant, which I've done before after the Neurothrope dies, which is pretty cute, but definitely just a consolation prize to losing your Warlord. So what ended up happening is my opponent dropped the Blight Drone over on the objective here. The plan was to try to get as many of the heavy vehicles dead immediately, then use the Blight Drone to leapfrog off the table with the Harridan. So the Harridan moved up. He did his thing. Unfortunately, the obscuring terrain here was a little bit awkward. I couldn't draw line of sight to both the Contemptors. I could only draw line of sight to one of them. So the Harridan got souped up. He killed one of them. I elected to put his other gun into the Death Shroud Terminators, because I felt like if I could kill 3 or 4 of them immediately, I could, once the Hive Guard come in, I could just wipe that unit and not have to deal with them trying to score direct assault. In hindsight, maybe I should have put it into a Plague Burst Crawler. The Plague Burst Crawlers were in the dense cover, so they were -1 to hit. But being able to like bracket those guys would have been a pretty big deal. My opponent ended up just making, I think I rolled 3 1s to wound against the Death Shroud, and my opponent made 4 out of his 5 4+ invulnerable saves, so I actually ended up killing 1 Death Shroud Terminator with the Harridan gun, which felt bad. Given what I rolled, I think I actually just straight up would have killed a Plague Burst Crawler if I had shot one, but obviously you can't, you don't know that when you declare your targets, so yeah, it is what it is. I did kill the Volkite Contemptor, though, and then he charged into the Blight Drone, and then tragedy struck, chat. The Harridan not killing stuff in melee was kind of the story of this tournament, because he went in, he rolled fine, I think, actually. He's hitting on 2s, rerolling, winning on 3s. I had exactly 4 CP left after I had souped his guns, Metabolic Overdrive, rerolled my stuff, and did all my MacGuffins, Relentless Flurried and everything. So I elected not to Voracious Appetite, and the reason for that was that on the off chance that the Harridan whiffed on the Blight Drone, then I would need the 3 CP +1 for Overrun to double fight into him. He ended up putting I think he put 4 wounds through on the blight drone, and my opponent made 3 out of 4 5+ invulnerable saves. So he didn't kill the blight drone. So that was, fortunately for me, pretty prescient, because I was able to double fight and kill the blight drone and overrun off the table. But the downside was the blight drone got to attack me, so it pings me for another 4. And I was also burned on CP at the bottom of 1, which felt super bad. So we're in a bad matchup already, off to a bad start. And then to make matters worse, obviously, the issue that I talked about before with the Swarm Lord being peeked out around the corner meant that he got killed by the entropy cannons as well. So on top of that, I also lost the Swarm Lord sort of randomly. Now, I obviously this is like, you know, positional mistake. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's kind of a teachable moment, though, because, you know, I guess I should have lasered the line of sight beforehand just to check it. But I'm, you know, 99% of the time, I think I would have assumed that I was out of line of sight with that angle. And I think, like, I do not trust myself not to make that mistake again. It's just gonna be something I'm gonna have to be more cognizant of in the future. But it was super, super duper unfortunate. Big field bans, unfortunately. So my opponent moved up. He took some pot shots with the Plague Burst Crawlers. I think they fired into... I literally can't remember. I think they fired at the Gene Stealers or something. It didn't really matter. They didn't do too much damage. All my stuff was out of line of sight. I think I lost 2 Ripper Swarms over here to Entropy Cannons. 1 Plague Burst Crawler got around the side and could see them. The last guy stuck around because he's a champ, and that ended up locking me the objective, which was a really big deal. My opponent did, you know, I took the shot from the Hive Tyrant I talked about earlier into the Poxwalkers that were in the center. My opponent removed the models on the objective, which is the correct call, so I couldn't get any more line of sight onto them. And then he ended up just dead walking again to put a guy back on the objective to lock it for him and score his direct assault. Now, interestingly, he only put the Poxwalkers on the objective. I don't know if this was a mistake or maybe he was trying to bait me into sort of playing more aggressively or something, but he only having the Poxwalkers there meant that I had a chance to knock him off. And with how far behind I was, I felt like the only way to get back in the game was to play primary super hard. So the Harridan came back on, obviously. The Hive Guard came on. Without Swarmlord, he was my onslaught caddy, so I unfortunately can't onslaught them either. So they did very little this turn. I started moving my stuff aggressively around to get a Retrieve Octarius data. So I had the warrior unit in the corner here moving up, and I had the warrior unit on the side here moving up as well. And what I elected to do was actually, I think I missed a bunch of pictures, essentially. Yeah, I did. Oops, my bad. That's okay. I'll talk through it. What I elected to do was move the Hive Tyrant very aggressively and put Catalyst on himself. And basically, with where I was in the game, I basically said to myself, the game plan needs to be that this Hive Tyrant moves out into the open and eats every single Entropy Cannon shot and not die. And so that was what we tried to do. So this turn, he stood around and he killed some more of the Poxwalkers. And I think we knocked my opponent off of the center objective again. I also was able to get the 15-point score because I was holding all the outside objectives, so that was pretty good as well, and I was able to get my Lictor in the back there to get a big 3 points on engage. I killed the second Volkite Contemptor with the Harridan, and started to pick out more of this Death Shroud unit. I killed another guy with the Hive Guard. The follow-up turn, my opponent killed the Harridan with the follow-up shooting. All of the Plague Burst Crawlers and all of their Entropy Cannons went into the Harridan and killed him, which sounds about right. Because he had to ping himself for mortal wounds a couple times, and in order to get the +1 to wound, and he took 4 from the Blight Drone. He was pretty far down on wounds. I think he had 14 left by the time the entropy shrouded him. Obviously, there is a chance that, you know, with the -1 to hit and all of the needing force to wound on the entropy cannons, there is an off chance that he just flubs and the Harridan survives, but it did not happen, so the Harridan went down. Very super sad. He went down in 2 out of 3 games this weekend, actually, which is unfortunate. So I elected to move the Hive Tyrant up aggressively in response. He actually moved up into this corner to get a shot into the Poxwalkers, and he ended up wiping the Poxwalkers, which was good, because that allowed me to clear that objective off again. It did put the Hive Tyrant in line of sight of all the entropy cannons, but again, the game plan at this point, I was down the Harridan, I was down Swarmlord, and it was not looking good. The game plan was just to eat every entropy cannon shot and make all my 4+ invulnerable saves. And that's basically how that turn went. I actually had I had some pretty interesting screens out here. I had placed the Lictor sort of aggressively to screen out anybody jumping in to try to get the Gene Stealers. That's also why the Warriors were out here, and then this one last Ripper Swarm was sort of completing the screen. So I had the Lictor screen, I had the Ripper screen, and then I had the Warriors in the back here. So we were bubbling out basically this, any profitable engagement that last Deathshroud Terminator unit could do. So I felt pretty good about the level of screening and board control I had, and it's definitely the case a lot of times with the Death Guard army that they're so resilient, they do so much damage, but the Tyranids just kind of run circles around them, and that was kind of happening here. My opponent elected to drop his Death Guard into the Terminators into this quarter and take some shots into the Warriors. He killed a couple of them, but didn't wipe them out. And then he turned all of the entropy cannons onto the Hive Tyrant. And plan, make all your invulnerable saves, went absolutely flawlessly. The Hive Tyrant, I think, after the dust had cleared from 3 full Plague Burst Crawlers shooting, as well as a Foul Blight Spawn with his Flamer, the Harridan had taken 7 damage, which was wild. So that was sort of what I needed to get back in. And I was feeling pretty good about it. That got us to the bottom of 4. Yeah, okay. So here's the aftermath of the Hive Tyrant taking every single las cannon or entropy cannon and not dying. My opponent got in to clear out the Warriors here. He finally cleared out the Ripper over here, so we kind of lost control of this objective to the Poxwalkers. I moved up the Tyranid Warriors pretty aggressively after the Poxwalkers had died in order to obsec that objective away, so my opponent didn't lock it in, and he would have to kill those guys in order to take it back. And I played very cagey with my Gene Stealers, because I figured if I needed them for the bottom round 5 scoring, I needed a big unit that could metabolic overdrive and go very quickly to grab multiple objectives. I was so far up on primaries that I was basically locked in for the 45 on primary by the end of round 5, because essentially I had locked these objectives and there was nothing fast enough in my opponent's army to contest them. So I scored a 15 early, and then or 2 15s early actually, and then a 10, and then all I had to do was get a 5 at bottom of round 5, which is assuming that my synapse doesn't all die, is literally impossible not to, essentially. All I had to do is spend this VP to get obsec and then run something onto the objective, because none of my opponent's frontline stuff had objective secured anymore. Now, my opponent had the Foul Blight Spawn run up to attack the Hive Tyrant, so I elected to make... This is on bottom of round 4. So going into round 5, we were basically tied at this point. My opponent was way up on secondaries because I had taken Retrieve Octarius data. I was only able to get 3 table quarters. I was down a little bit on Engage in All Fronts. I was getting 2 points a turn. I got a 3.1 turn. But Assassinate was blanked out for me. My opponent obviously had the Assassinate from killing the Swarmlord. And I figured that I could trade the Hive Tyrant for the Foul Blight Spawn. And that was a 1-to-1 trade, but then what I could do is use the Hive Mind Imperative to give objective secured to the Hive Tyrant, move him up here. He was bracketed, so he only moved 12. Charge the Plague Burst Crawler, and then pile and consolidate onto this objective. That was going to break my opponent's objective in the back there. He would have to kill the Hive Tyrant, which I'm sure he would with all the entropy cannons. Which would give him the Assassinate point, obviously, but I would get the Assassinate for the Blight Spawn, and then I would drop him down to 5 victory points for just holding the center objective on the... what's the word? On the... or I would... Yeah, I would drop him to 5... for holding this objective. I think I was gonna obsec this objective, if I remember the interaction correctly. What ended up happening was that that's washed out. There we go. The Hive Tyrant. This poor Hive Tyrant. Things went kind of south, unfortunately. The Gene Stealers had run up and killed the Death Shroud Terminator unit that was over here with the help of the Neurothrope and the Hive Guard. The Hive Tyrant smite and screamed into the Blight Spawn, rolled 2 1s for damage, unfortunately, only did him 2 damage. Killed him with the Devourers. Fortunately, we got the extra 2 wounds through and killed him to score the Assassinate, so that was good. He charged the Plague Burst Crawler, and he only rolled a 3 for his charge. And that meant we proxy-based this out, we used widgets, and every way we measured it, he was about 1/10 of an inch off from touching that objective after his pile-in and consolidate. It was so freaking close. And unfortunately, the Hive Tyrant, I wasted the CP on the objective secured. I wasted the Hive Tyrant's entire movement, and he moved up and biffed it on contesting that objective to knock my opponent down to 5 VP. And that was a pretty big deal, obviously. So what that meant was that I had actually moved off, it let my opponent get a 15-pointer because I think they had, because they were still holding this, they would be getting more victory points than I was. And so that ended up being essentially like a 10-point swing, which was pretty bad. My opponent obviously then just entropy cannoned the Hive Tyrant to death. And unfortunately, he buffed the range of the Flamers with the stratagem onto the Death Shrouds in the middle. They shot into the Warriors, or into the Gene Stealers, excuse me. They killed a couple of them, and they actually made this charge from the Poxwalkers into the Gene Stealers pretty long. My opponent, unfortunately for me, made the 6-inch charge, or a 7-inch charge, excuse me. Used his stratagem for mortal wounds on 10 Poxwalkers. Rolled 6 6s for mortal wounds. Knocks the Gene Stealers down to, I think, 2 models, and was able to kill those 2 models with the remaining attacks. So that was a very big swing, because I wasn't expecting to lose the Gene Stealers there, assuming that the Hive Tyrant needed all of the mortars to kill them, and you couldn't shoot mortars into them. Because the Gene Stealers were in a position where they could have run to get engaged on all fronts here. So I have the Rippers in the corner. You can't quite see them, actually, because they're they're hidden by my camera. Can we move? Let's just move the whole window. Here we go. There's Rippers here. You can see them. So I would have been holding these 2 quarters, and then the Gene Stealers could have run up to grab this quarter for 2 points on engage. My opponent also only had 1 kill for his Grind Them Down, which he hadn't been scoring super well. He scored it, I think, the 3 rounds in the middle, rounds 2 through... or he'd scored it 2 times, I think. So he was looking for the 3rd score on Grind Them Down. Assuming I only lose the Hive Tyrant, I can pretty easily kill either the Poxwalkers or the Death Shrouds with random stuff I have remaining, assuming that the Gene Stealers survive. So the Gene Stealers, if there were a couple left in here, we smite the Poxwalkers, we shoot the Poxwalkers with Hive Guard, the Gene Stealers run in, kill the Poxwalkers. I tie on Grind, I score 2 on Engage, and we make back some of that deficit. Unfortunately, my opponent killed them with the Poxwalkers, so I lost Grind, I didn't get Engage, and I actually, after all of that, grab the final score here. I ended up going down an incredibly close. It was 85-79, so it was a 7-point differential. My opponent was actually 2 points up on painting, so if they hadn't, if there wasn't the progressive paint scores and my movement tray didn't count for for points, then with that 5-point swing on that last turn, I would have it would have been a tie game. If the Hive Tyrant had gotten his tap here, that would have been a win. Oh, chat! It was such a close game. Absolute heartbreaker at the end. I think, unfortunately, it was the Hive Tyrant basically rolling the 3 on the charge roll there. That sealed the deal, sealed my fate, and I went down to Death Guard. Now, obviously, I do think that even with all that, I was very happy with how the list played, because even in almost the single worst situation, which is into Death Guard going second on sweep and clear, I was able to basically play it to a stalemate, which I think was I felt pretty good about, chat. I would have a hard time sort of cooking up any worse matchups than that. I'd probably sort of like any variety of AdMech going second is like maybe worse. And then, or maybe like a Harlequins, like a Eldari Harlequin soup is like worse. But this is a very bad matchup for me, and I was very happy to get to the point that I could. But in considering the game after the fact, thinking about all of these sort of multiple Hiveguard and Genestealer lists that a lot of people are playing, they have very little way to deal with things like those Volcan Contemptors or those Plaguebearers Crawlers. And I was very happy to have the Harridan in my list, just, you know, at least for the chance to be able to knock those guys out and remove the threat of those mortars and those entropy cannons and stuff like that. Now, obviously, the dice are a little wacky both ways. My opponent had good saves early. I had good saves in the Hive Tyrant over here, and my advanced rolls to get to this objective early were pretty good. The Harridan flubbing on turn 1 was also a big one, because that ate a lot of my CP for, you know, rerolling stuff and double tapping stuff. So, I think the dice were a little silly both ways, but definitely I think that the game could have gone either way. And it ended up being a super duper good game for the finals of the event. So I was pretty happy with it. I think if there's any kind of loss that's the most exciting loss, it's the one where you it's a very good tactical game. And I do think that realistically, the way that I probably lock in sort of the game here is if the Swarm Lord's maybe an inch or two farther back over here and doesn't get shot. That also probably would have done it with how close it ended up being. Woo! So that was the end of the day, chat. I think I placed pretty well. I was 5th, 5 out of 30. It's all right with the 2-1 record. I was at the top tables with big scores. So feeling pretty good, but definitely, I think showcasing kind of how strong the Harridan list is. And that is that's all I got to say about that game. Woo. So I'll just take a look through chat here, everybody. Well, before we move on. Looks like a lot of people have some questions. David Firth. Only been playing it for about 6 months. Just got in before new rules drop, running dual side Tyranids and a Maliceptor. That sounds awesome, dude. Side Tyranids are pretty good. I like the barbs right now. I like barb Tyranids right now, but I think side Tyranids are pretty solid for your front line. Greg, my Tyrant was off the board edge. Yeah, so we actually ended up proxy basing him, because he and Harridan kept bumping wings. It was also, it's tough to put models underneath the Hive Tyrant. So they deployed the Hive Tyrant first and then tried to deploy the Genestealers around him. So we just moved him in order to do that. But yeah, I kept knocking stuff over when he was there. So he's actually this black circle. Tom, Death Guard would be strong if they could make Death Shroud objective secured. Yeah, it's definitely it's lucky that they aren't objective secured. Volcan Contemptor missiles are 36 inches, are they? I thought they were 48. Maybe I'm wrong. Did I get cheated? Like gasp. The cycle missile launchers are only 36 inches. Okay, yeah, I thought they were regular crack missiles. But they're not. They're actually shorter. So I actually shouldn't have been shot by either of those Contemptors on turn 1. I don't think that ended up mattering. I think maybe he took an extra couple of damage, but my opponent's probably could have advanced instead of shooting, and it might have been better for him, honestly. Cisfecdemium. Finally found the courage to sign up for a tournament locally. You play a fluffy Wraithdar list. Should you panic? Probably. Unfortunately, Wraithdar is pretty... It's not amazing. The models are not the most efficient. It's fun. You'll have a good time. At the very least, play 3 games and you know, learn a bunch of stuff, and you'll be okay. Um, I don't know if you're gonna win the whole thing though, to be honest, but I think you'll have a good time. Reveal what's in the closet. The closet's that's actually a door. It goes to an entirely new room. Very exciting. Taji, have I considered Tyrant Guard with Crushing Claws as a brawl type of unit with the new Leviathan stuff? I have considered it. I don't think it's any good. The Tyrant Guard are too expensive, and they eat your adaptive physiologies. And for as much as you can, put a bunch of synaptic links on them and stuff like that, like the synaptic links, you're limited to using 3 per turn, right? And the links you're using are almost always better used on a unit with guns. The fact that like a Crushing Claw unit of Tyrant Guard costs the same as a Hive Guard unit and does like similar damage except in melee instead of range is sort of travesty. Bad stuff. As you tried Mr. Dan on Friday, proxied against the Knights. It's a brutal matchup. Yeah, it's crazy. Tyranids do have they struggle against super heavies without a unit like that, but I think the Harridan definitely sometimes feels like it's a little bit too much in the opposite direction because he just fucking kills them immediately. Rough. What games am I playing? Any tournaments this weekend? I'd like to. I think if there's tournaments, if there's local tournaments, I will certainly be playing in them for sure. I haven't looked this weekend to see if there are any tournaments. Jonathan Davis, want to get into Warhammer? I thought about memeing a scout army with sentinels. It'll take you forever, but I wonder what it looks like if you get 18 of them. I think it would look super cool. I think you lose hard on Bring It Down, unfortunately. So that list would be very much of a meme, but it would be fun for sure. Mexichan, could we talk about what to do in a Harridan mirror match? The answer is you go second in the Harridan mirror match, actually, chat. Because whoever goes first has to drop their Harridan first, because they will basically bow strategic reserve, probably. It helps, I think, if you run the Genestealer Cult attachment, if you're thinking of, like, if you're pretty sure you're going to play against Harridans. The Genestealer Cult attachment actually helps a lot because it can screen out where the Harridan can drop turn 1, so you probably don't lose like your Hive Guard early if the Harridan sticks around. So that kind of forces your opponents to strategic reserve them, but then whoever goes first, their Harridan gets shot by the other Harridan first, and that's super bad. Oof. Nukati Knight Tyrant Guards aren't even tanky. They're a little bit tanky. The 3+ armor ignoring AP 1 and 2 is like, it's fine. The downside is that you can only take the downside, in addition to them being wildly overcosted, but is that you can only take 6 of them. So unlike a warrior unit, that those defensive buffs aren't going on 27 wounds, they're only going on 18 wounds, and that's pretty rough. Holy Order. So I think Chaos Space Marines will be competitive when they receive 2 wounds. I think they will be competitive. To be perfectly fair, I think they're already competitive in soup lists already. I think having Chaos Space Marines offer a lot that other Chaos sub-factions can't necessarily give you. And especially since it feels like we're moving towards a metagame that's kind of more lightly armored, which means that things like Noise Marine blobs are going to be way more scary, especially since they can deep strike turn 1 with their drop pod now. Ooh, oh boy. That's real scary. The downside was that you would always run into, 2+ armor saves, you would run into like Death Guard, you would run into damage reduction, you'd run into all that stuff, and they would just fall apart. But if you're playing against, stuff like Drukhari or stuff like Tyranids, stuff like that, Noise Marines are absolutely lethal. They are terrifying. Whether I think like 2 wounds is going to be the cutoff where they like suddenly become good, I don't know if the 2 wounds is going to be as impactful as people think it does, as people think it will. You also will ostensibly have to pay points for those, so you'll have less models on the table and all that stuff. And 2 damage weapons will still kill you just fine. It's not like having 2 wounds on a Plague Marine, because that's much more effective with the wounds reduction. But I do think that once they receive 2 wounds, they will also get a book to match, and I think that's what will make them super good, because all of the books so far in 9th edition have definitely given the factions a big old glow up. So yeah, good stuff. Webway Games, have I been impressed by the Maliceptor? Unsure personally, but better players seem to be liking it. It's fine, I think. It's kind of it's like a poor man's Resonance Barb Hive Tyrant, but it has upside, which is the -1 strength aura. Obviously, the -1 strength is very matchup dependent. So, and I think I was watching some of the coverage from the Austin US Open this weekend, and Nick pointed out, actually, very appropriately, I think, that the -1 strength is most impactful in the Orc matchup, which is everything's basically strength 5, and you are majority strength 4 or 5, which means that -1 strength is going to affect a lot of the Orc shooting, especially indirect shooting and flyers. And the less that factions that get hit by that strength buff get played, the less effective the Maliceptor is going to be in general. So if you're T8 and you're playing against a lot of las cannons, it's great. If you're T5 and you're playing against like Recatrex Squig Buggies, it's great. But then a lot of times you'll hit like 2 out of 3 matchups where it's not super great, and you would rather have something else in that slot. But on the flip side, having a +1 to cast on a relatively tough body, I think is still super duper strong. They got me twice. Is this over the course of the event chat? Yeah, that's so not gonna lie, that's like super embarrassing that I didn't know that those missile launchers were at 36-inch range. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an excuse. Oopsie. Definitely would have felt way more tech by that Harridan redeploy. Because I would have taken 4 less missile launcher shots and 16 less Volkite shots. Oh yeah, there you go. I got so close even with giving my opponent an initial 12 inches of range on their guns, chat. Easy peasy. Max, what I think of Synaptic Hive Blades? I generally don't take them, but if you know you're going to play against a lot of invulnerable saves, they're fine. If you're building to be smashy, the 4 Scything Talons is better, but obviously the upside is that you get to take a gun in addition to getting that ignore invulnerable saves. So it's kind of a trade-off. It's also significantly more expensive than just having 4 Scything Talons. But if all your buddies play Harlequins and you need a unit that can kill Harlequins, then like super duper dead, then that guy is going to be sweet. The Volkite is 45? Yeah. Yeah, that's why I was able to deploy out of range of one of the Volkites, because it was only 45. It was actually, he was within 48, or move and shoot with 48, but he was outside 45, which is why it was like a contention. All right, chat. Anyway, do people want to talk about some of the results from this weekend? So we can, I'll pull up my BCP and we can talk about some of these lists that did very well. So I did review a couple of the streams from this weekend to take a look at how well some of the lists did. I think the results are pretty interesting. Just grab my events here, chat. Oops. Yeah. So here's my, oops, come on. Here's my BCP. So I think we had, yeah, they cut the top 16. So we had Tyranid Ben in the top 16. Good to see Tyranid Ben there. I think he's He might have been dethroned, but he was #1 Tyranids on the BCP rankings for a while. Let's see if that's still true. Oh, I can't find it. Yeah, so he's #2 now. He's been bumped down by Matt Evans, which is fair. Although, oh no, Matt's score is bugged. So actually, he might still be #1. Yeah. Matt's Olympus Games GT got submitted twice, it looks like. That's awkward. Oops. Too bad. I hope that's not on ITC rankings. It very well may be. So, yeah, obviously we had Manny at the top, as well as John Lennon, plus Tyranid Ben at the top here. And I think the real question is whether or not this the triple hive guard style that Manny was running is kind of the future of the faction, and whether or not it's kind of sort of as brutally overpowered as people assume it is. He actually, I think over the last couple of weeks, he did a lot of iteration on this list, at least from the events that we can see. Moved to it's weird that he's only marked 5 Scything Talons on his Gene Stealers. That's interesting. Okay. So he's he cut a lot of the kind of more technical pieces and moved to taking a unit of Devourer Termagants. I kind of like that because one of the issues that Hiveguard can have is kind of a volume of fire. It's 36 shots, but that's, you kind of cap at 36 shots. So having that big unit to be able to problem solve, either alpha strike something really hard with the double tap and all the explosions, or just kill up 1 billion infantry if you need it. And he's also cut down the Gene Stealers to 12-man, so it's 2 12-man Gene Stealer units plus the Devourer Termagants, another unit of 10 Termagants just for technical stuff. That's in a Leviathan detachment plus a unit of 5 Hiveguard, which is interesting. That's the unit that's gonna get Swarm Leadered from the Tyranid Prime, so he's full rerolling on only a unit of 5 instead of a unit of 6. Which I'm not 100% sure about. It's kind of funky. But then the other detachment is a Highfleet Kronos, and that brings 2 Tyranid Warrior units, and then 2 more units of Hiveguard. So we're going to Bioweapon Bond both Hiveguard units. They're going to stand still to get the reroll ones, and that seems pretty good. Then he's also got a cut down Gene Stealer Cult detachment with a Magus and an Acolyte Hybrid unit. So 125 points and 2 CP to get 2 zones of flyer denial on the top of one. Now, interestingly, I think a weakness of this list is actually, and it's significantly less of a weakness, obviously, after the data slate rebalance. But a weakness of the list is flyers if you go first. Because obviously going first, those GSC models have to pour in at the start of your movement phase. And that means that they no longer have that bubble of denying flyers. So you're actually, if the flyers can back deploy, you can only redeploy the Leviathan Hiveguard unit, so you can get 1 unit of Hiveguard up in the front. But if flyers are far enough away, it's unlikely that the Hiveguard unit kills too many aircraft. It might kill 1, and then you have to eat shooting from another one, which finally, it isn't too bad. But there are situations where even forward deploying it, you're not actually in range. It's a little bit awkward, and obviously you're going to lose that Hiveguard unit to direct fire shooting anyway. So you've kind of just traded a Hiveguard unit for 1 airplane, which isn't the greatest thing ever. I feel like the 6-man being in Leviathan would make more sense. Yeah, so he has a 5-man, I think, so that he can game to the last a little bit. So the to the lasts are the 2 Hiveguard units as well as the Swarmlord, which I think is good to the last. If you to the last all 3 Hiveguard units, it makes things a little bit awkward. But you can play a little bit more Cavalier with the 5-man because it's not to the lasted and you can forward deploy it and throw it away and use it as a kind of a trading piece. So it makes sense that that would be the less expensive one. It also means that your coherency is a little bit easy. He might have literally gotten into awkward positions where having to brick all 3 Hive Guard units runs out of real estate really quickly. So I think there are reasons that he would get in, that he would put the 5-man into the Leviathan detachment. I think I buy it. I'll take it. GSC patrol into aircraft is fine on GW open terrain, even if you go first. Yeah, so the other thing that's, I think, important to talk about is that this list, I think, benefits greatly from the US open terrain. So if you're somebody who's looking at Tyranid lists and being, oh, this list did really well, we'll just take this route. The US open layouts are very beneficial to running these indirect fire units, and specifically the ones that they had at the event, because I believe that they had sort of refined the positioning of ruins on the bases in this one. So you actually had true line of sight blocking ruins in your deployment zone, that they weren't just placed on the base, they were oriented such that the ruin itself, you know, was hard cover against anything you were going to shoot, which meant that you could deploy Hive Guard that much farther forward. The downside of the big bases in the US Open maps, obviously, is that, you know, if you touch them, you use true line of sight, which means that a lot of times you'd have to deploy that much farther back because the base is so big and you can't afford to touch it with any of the Hive Guard. So you'd run out of space in like the back corner of your deployment zone. And Hive Guard not being that far range means that they run into issues if they have to deploy too far away. And I mean, we literally just talked about that in my games here, right? In the Thousand Suns game, the Hive Guard had to deploy so far back because the terrain was so big and in place in the back that they couldn't shoot anything beyond this line, basically. So my opponent's entire army could just sit back here and be basically immune to Hive Guard. Also, Hive Guard were too slow to move through the terrain, so we couldn't, without an advance roll, we couldn't even get out of that situation. They were just locked in there. Obviously, that's fine. Hive Guard usually just shoot what they can, but if you run into a situation where, you know, you don't have that super good forward position you can put the Hive Guard very safely, it can go very poorly for you. So I do think that's something to keep in mind when you're kind of analyzing, especially this style of list. It's very predicated on Hive Guard units, is that it's very much built for the terrain. And any less terrain or any less true line of sight blocking terrain, I think this list becomes significantly less powerful. There's going to be a lot of situations in which, like, you have to place your Hive Guard units, and you might not have enough room for two of them, right? 2 full Hive Guard units takes up a lot of real estate. And if one has to peek out and a Contemptor gets a line of sight on it, it's a dead Hive Guard unit. Bad. Not good for them. Daniel, do 6s to hit auto wound count as a roll of a 6 for rending? No. It does not. It did in 8th for, I think, literally about a half second. There were a lot of weird interactions when additional hits counted as dice rolls. It's just a successful wound roll. Puppies and beer, make Hive Guard max 3 unit and remove double move mechanics for Tyranids. I don't know about that. I'd be into Hive Guard being max 3 for sure. I think what ends up happening is if Tyranids, now obviously Tyranids didn't sort of, and I think it's important to know, they didn't take this tournament by storm. Clearly, you know, this is one of the biggest data points that we have post Octarius release and post Data Slate rebalance. And we have Drukhari as 3 out of the top 4, excuse me, 3 out of the top 5. Obviously, Tyranids are 2 more. In the top 8, like, we have 4 Drukhari, it's half Drukhari. 1 Adeptus Mechanicus, 2 Forces of the Hive Mind, and we have a Grey Knights in there. But clearly, Drukhari is still a big problem in the metagame, and that's probably the next thing to get taken a look at. I think if we'd seen Tyranids absolutely dominating everything, we would be, in the realm looking for a rebalance. But it doesn't feel like we're at the same level. We'll have to give it some time, so I'm not 100% sure. But I think the biggest downside is, situations and matchups where you get into the NPE of playing against big masses of indirect fire. And that can be a huge problem, but whether or not that's where the faction ends up, because a lot of the other armies that we see a little bit more mid-range, I'm not 100% sure. Now, obviously, Manny did go down to Richard Siegler, and I was reviewing that game for the chat today, and I think in addition to the army being relatively pretty heavily terrain oriented, I do think that the game highlighted kind of the big weakness of the Hive Guard spam version, which is that you cut so much out of your technical pieces, and you're relying. I mean, you have almost 1,000 points of Hive Guard, right? 780 points of Hive Guard, 760 points. Is that right? Yeah, that sounds right. You're leaning so heavily on those Hive Guard to deal your damage for you that if you get into a situation where they can't or they just don't, and especially against a player who knows how to deal with them, then you don't have a fallback plan. It's not like, we can turn on the melee mode and the Hive Guard will punch themselves out of melee, because if the Hive Guard don't kill the stuff that's charging at them and then you charge and engage them, the game's over. You already lost. It's GG. And that's what it seems like happened to that game. Obviously, going second, I think, is very bad for the list as well. It alpha strikes ridiculously hard going first if you deploy aggressively. But if your opponent is resilient enough to eat the one round of shooting from Hive Guard, which in fairness a lot of armies, can do, it's a lot of shooting and it's very good shooting, but it's not like an AdMech army, So, a lot of armies will lose a bunch of units, but then are able to close that gap. And once you've done that, you have the Swarmlord and 24 Genestealers to fight back. And I don't think that's enough. And obviously there are situations where, in most situations, the Hive Guard are going to be able to clear you out to the point where you're going to be able to punch back enough to win the game. But you're relying so heavily on just those 3 units to deal damage that, if the dice don't go your way, then you just basically lose. And I think that's kind of emblematic of the result, right? Because Manny went... Did he go 5-0? Or how many games did they play in the top 16? 4? Yeah, I guess this was top cut. So they played 8 games. So he went 4-0, and then top cut and went 3-0. So he was, you're basically leaning on these relatively dice-dependent units to deal damage in 8 consecutive games, and in one of the games they didn't. And he, and there's no recourse. You just die. So whether or not we're gonna see this style of army, see a lot of play, we may, and it's probably going to be relatively effective. But I think that it's going to be too inflexible to be like super reliable in the future. And that does feel like kind of a problem for Tyranids in general, and especially some of these other lists, like John Lennon's list that's relying more on the termagants and stuff like that. They also have a similar problem. Obviously, they deal more damage, but whether or not they can get range on their opponent without getting engaged or getting killed by blast weapons or any of these questions is a big deal. That's a huge question. And if you can't get a lot of damage out of those units, your fallback is units of 12 Genestealers, which aren't really, quite going to do it. So it doesn't feel to me like we're in a panic mode where Tyranids are too powerful. I would definitely like to see, honestly, I would like to see Hive Guard brought down a peg, so they didn't feel quite as much of an auto include, and we didn't necessarily see all of these like super Hive Guard centric lists. It wouldn't surprise me if stuff like bioweapon bonds moved to only affecting melee attacks or stuff like that. And Relentless Flurry, only affecting melee attacks. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw that change if Tyranids continue to be dominant, but it doesn't feel to me like they're as powerful as any of the top tier factions right now. They're definitely like at the very top, but one step down from the Drukaris of the world. The Guardian Knight Imperial Fist Specialist Attachment doing 6 to hit equals 3 hits and 6 extra shots was a funny moment that lasted as long as it should. The best part was when the Imperial Fists supplement came out. I think I've talked about this on stream previously, but they ruled that an exploding attack on a hit roll counts as adding another die of this, like, set to the same facing, which meant that you would roll a 6 to hit and it would generate an additional 6 to hit, which would then chain infinitely. So you would roll a single 6 to hit and kill anything in the game. That lasted for about a day, but it's so stupid. Why would you say that? Games Workshop, why? Very silly. Komodo Panther, have we talked about the shoot again for 2 CP? That is one of the core strengths of the Tyranid of the Tyranid game plan. Getting Hardguard blapped by a pair of Cadian full payload Manticores is a bad day? Yeah, for sure. That's the other downside is, obviously counter battery kills them super hard, especially stuff they can't reach. You can make that very unlikely, and I know, obviously, John Lennon's list had a lot of defensive technology built in to keep those guys alive. I think he had was he running a Maliceptor? He was, right? Or not a Maliceptor, a Malanthrope? He was, yeah. He actually didn't have... Oh, he had his Malanthrope as the reroll caddy. I like that, actually. That's pretty good. So you can, with that guy or with Venomthropes, you can cut those Manticores down to hitting on 5s. You can enhanced resistance them so that they still get their 4+ save against you. So you can make it super tough for that Manticore to kill those Hiveguard. But you're still eating a lot of damage, and if one goes through, it's a bad day, for sure. Yeah, I think the other downside of those multiple Hiveguard lists is that you just don't have space for all of that defensive technology. So you can make it so that your single unit of Hiveguard is so much tougher to kill than the 3 units on the other side. John also has in this version of the list, he has the space for extra models in the Gene Stealer Cult attachment. He's got a Patriarch, which I absolutely love. Love that guy. So he's got 3 anti-flyer drops instead of just 2. Now, the one thing that I'm interested in seeing sort of move on into the future is how much these Devourer Termagants continue to see play. Because it might just be the metagames that I play in or the matchups that I typically play, but I'm so monstrously underwhelmed by them. And even watching other people play with them, they don't feel that good, especially since they're sort of they parasitically take all the buffs from everything else. So they deal a lot of damage when they can shoot, if they can shoot, despite the fact that their range is terrible and they can't do it. They don't do any damage with a deep strike and all these other issues. But the turn that they shoot, the rest of your army also does significantly less damage because it's not re-rolling and it's not getting +1 to hit. Especially your Hiveguard. Like, your Hiveguard, so they're also not double tapping. So it's not like the Devourer Termagant unit does damage in a vacuum, and it ends up stealing damage from the rest of its army. Fred, were there any pure Tyranids lists? I believe Tyranid Ban was in as pure Tyranids. Yes. So I've streamed a lot of a bunch of Tyranid Bands games over. If you check out the over on our stream replay channel, so it's youtube.com/tacticaltortoisetv. You should be able to find some games with him of his, and I believe there might be some others from T5S2 Invitationals on the main channel as well, on this channel. But yeah, he's a very good Tyranids player. He's played a ton of games. So he had a double Hive Guard build. This is very similar to one that I played recently. It's 2 Hive Guard, 2 big Gene Stealer units, 18 Gene Stealers. Is that right? Or is that a 10? Well, that's a 10. All right. Well, I like that less. Plus a Trigon. I actually like the Trigon because it's a caddy for murderous size, but it doesn't take your HQ slot. So it's like a smashy Hive Tyrant that doesn't fly. Basically, it does more damage, but the no fly is bad. But you could deep strike it and charge it to something and just roll an 8. If he has a gun on a Synapse creature, you can actually make it better. No. So sometimes you see the Wombo combo be, or I guess he can buff himself, actually, if he shoots something with his own gun. But you also see a lot of times a warrior unit with a couple Venom cannons in it, so like a relatively big warrior unit in the list of the Trigon, because then you can Hunter's Drive for whichever unit pops out of reserve. So it'd be an 8 on 3d6 drop, the lowest. And that gets into the realm of, I think that's like a 60 or 65% or something. And then with a CP reroll, it gets very likely that you make that charge roll. Greg, what has me worried about Tyranids being broken or not is that we were seeing an 8th edition codex competing in 9th edition. Which means they get their 9th edition decks. It could go the way of Admech or Necrons. I think that's potentially true. The difference is that, like, if they went the way of Necrons, that would be bad, because Necrons are the opposite, right? They're the other end of the spectrum from Admech. It could go the way of Adeptus Mechanicus and be super duper strong, or it could they could be awful. But I think the power of Adeptus Mechanicus was in their raw data sheets, and I don't think that's the case for Tyranids. The power of the Tyranid faction is from all of their abilities and stuff like that. So if you didn't touch their data sheets at all, and you changed a lot of their abilities to be less powerful, the faction would be significantly worse. Whereas Adeptus Mechanicus, their abilities changed, and they lost a couple of powerful abilities, but their units remained the same or went up in power level, and as such, the entire faction increased. They were already at the top, and they went even farther up. And Tyranids are, without the Psychic Awakening stacked on top of the Warzone Octarius, it's a bundle of garbage, basically. And so when a new codex releases and they'll rewrite all those abilities, which they have done in all of the 9th edition codexes so far, then they then things are going to change significantly, I think. Basically, you can't really speculate as to how powerful Tyranids are going to be at that point, but assuming you lose double moves and metabolic overdrive and double taps and all this stuff that makes all these Tyranid units really good, and you're left with raw Tyranid data sheets with like maybe some stat buffs, it's going to be real bad. It's going to be real bad. Tom Sawyer, Devours make you not want to use the unit as a throwaway unit, which is what most cons probably want to be doing in most games. Yeah. And I mean, I think part of the strength of, at least based on what I've seen, is a player like John, despite the fact that his units are so expensive, he still uses them as throwaway units to do stuff and take primary objectives and stuff like that. And I think being able to kind of divorce yourself from the fact that this is like a big shooting battery is certainly how you get the most use out of the unit. That's certainly something like an issue that I've had is like, well, I have to use their gun every turn, or I have to play them cagey so I don't lose my 200-point unit. And then they don't do anything and they suck. But if you're using them more aggressively and they're touching stuff and engaging stuff and take objectives, then I think that's good. And the gun is like an upside. I think that's probably the way that you look at it. Whether or not that's worth 182 points per unit, I'm not sure. I don't know. Anyway, I'm willing to say I don't think Tyranids are overpowered so far, chat. I'm definitely willing to be proven wrong, and it may just be that we haven't seen the true power of the faction come out, but it definitely feels like they're at a point where they fight 9th edition codexes now. It's a game, but they don't automatically win or automatically lose, and I think that's a pretty good spot for the faction to be in, to be honest. I don't like that it's off the back of indirect fire being so powerful. I wish that more interesting units were better, but I do think that they're in an okay spot right now. And that's just what I have to say about that, I think. It was cool to see the interesting lists that were kind of popping out, though, because I think all of the different versions of Tyranids that did well at this event were significantly different. You know, we saw literally 1, 2, and 3 units of Hive Guard all played in the top 16 there. We also, looks like some interesting top 16s as well. We had a Chaos Knights using those new objective secured Moiraxes or War Dogs. That's friggin' sick. It's nice to see those guys getting some love. We also saw, two Knights lists, a Chaos Knights and an Imperial Knights in the top 16. This one's a Freeblade Lance even. Brian Jones, by the way, is an incredible player. I played him at Nova Open a couple years ago. He was very good and he was very nice, and I appreciated that. That was my first GET ever, I think. Yep. And I played against his Gilliman list. There's a report of that game on the channel if you go look far enough back for it. So I think beyond this over representation of Drukhari so far, it does feel like we're heading towards a position where the metagame is pretty fluid. And I think that's very good. Adeptus Mechanicus haven't been driven out entirely. Orcs have not been driven out entirely. We do have a couple orcs in here. We're seeing mixed Chaos, mixed Imperium. We're seeing Knights get played. Grey Knights, obviously, super powerful. So it's mostly a fight right now between like Grey Knights and Drukhari at the top of the game. Tyranids feel like a half step down below that, maybe in line with Adeptus Mechanicus, maybe a little bit below Adeptus Mechanicus. And then I think there's a lot of factions in that mid-board. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of garbage. And that's been kind of bumped back by the delay of the Genestealer Cult release. We'd like to see Genestealer Cult get some love. I also think, I personally, I would like to see the movement blocking utility of ambush markers from Genestealer Cult removed. I think that mechanic is just sort of unabashedly bad. Not in that, like, it makes aircraft worse. I think that's fine. Aircraft are very good to begin with, but it's just like, it doesn't make any sense, and it's very counterintuitive. And I would, I don't love it. Thousand Suns Codex gives me hope gives you hope for cool new stuff next year, New Gotti Night. Yeah, the Thousand Suns Codex is very cool. It was my that game in my tournament game this past weekend was my first game against a Mutalith Vortex Beast, and that I've always kind of liked that model, and I thought it was like kind of a cool niche pick. I think in the 7th edition Codex, or the 8th edition Codex, I picked it as the worst unit in the Codex, unfortunately, because it was just kind of confused. But the new version feels absolutely brutal. It's actually super good. Not broken or anything, but just like it has a gun that deals mortal wounds, and it like buffs your guys, and it sometimes it's hard to kill, and I think all of that is pretty good. And this one's a shark, so that's sweet. Brandon Hardcarver, how do I feel about two 12-man units of Gene Stealers compared to a one big blob? I'm actually interested to play with it. I think it's less resilient to indirect fire, which I'm a little bit worried about. Because, you know, your opponent drops like a mortar team on that unit and they're below 10 models. And then they lose their attack, which is bad. But the philosophy behind the unit, which is that you can abuse Relentless Flurry plus the auto wounding on 6s. Like the Wombo combo, which is that you unchecked Ferocity, Relentless Flurry, Swarm Leader to reroll everything. So you just fish for 6s in your hit rolls. Means that the unit hits like ridiculously above its weight class. And I'm actually really interested to play 12-man Gene Stealer units. I haven't played with the Tyranid Prime like I said, but I do think that I mean, there's a reason that many lists in the top 16 had sub 16-man Gene Stealer units, and I think it's because that combo's really good. Greg got to play in Akatillo Onslaught. Played wrong. Get to play into Drukhari, the new Drukhari, the new version where everyone's playing Talos and stuff. I think that... Oh, you played against the GSE Blips into Drukhari. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a weird mechanic. Like, literally, I did a video on the list that won previously, and you know, like, mea culpa. A lot of people picked it out in the comments that I didn't mention that the Gene Stealer cult were in there, not only to retrieve Bactaria's data and engage and do all that stuff, but also to screen aircraft. And that was because at the time of recording the video, I'd literally forgotten that they did that. It's been so long since that mechanic was relevant that I don't typically play Gene Stealer cult stuff, and I had just totally forgotten. And like I've watched and reported on games where it's happened and it's been very relevant, but it was just like it's just such a bizarre rule. You know, it's counterintuitive and weird, and I don't like it. I don't like it. I also think hard control effects like that are not very particularly healthy for the game. So it's a little bit of a personal preference. Anyway, chat. I think it was a pretty good discussion. I'm excited to see what stuff comes out in the future that ends up being good. I think we're kind of in a wide open space right now post Data Slate release. I'm excited that Tyranids are good. Obviously, as a Tyranid player, I'm a little bit biased, but the fact that we can mix it up with the big boys and have a good chance of winning is pretty exciting. We just got to knock down Drukhari a couple pegs. That'll be interesting. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up the stream there. But thanks everybody for hanging out with me during this discussion. A little bit of a tournament recap plus some discussion on the metagame right now. I'd like to continue to be live on Mondays. So if people keep coming in and watching, then I'll hang out with you. But obviously, I'm also stream generally Wednesdays and Fridays over on Twitch. So twitch.tv/tacticaltortoisetv. That's usually around the same time, 4 p.m. US Eastern time. I'll stream gameplay. I'll stream hobby streams, and we'll do hangouts. But right now, I've been grinding a lot of games to play to practice with the Harry Dan list and to play different Tyranid varieties. So I've been streaming a lot over there. So that's been good. And obviously, as you can see, at some point in the not too distant future, we're going to start doing in-person streams. I'll get some local players in. Either I'll commentate them, or we'll just sit back and play some games, and that'll also be awesome. So, yeah. Anyway, thanks everybody for hanging out. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.